Right, so we are in the middle of the discussion of those things in which you can ask a non-Jew to do an Isser D'Oraisa, which would normally be an Isser D'Rabbanan, because Amir Lachim is a D'Rabbanan, but the rabbis waived their Isser in 6 cases. So one was the Beit HaShmashos, which effectively really is a double D'Rabbanan case. Then we had the case of Sikresha, which, although is a Doraisa, you're technically not asking the non-Jew to do a malacha, and that's why that's lenient. Then we have the Chol She'ein Bo Sakana, the sick person who's not deathly ill, and that's really because all rabbinic law is suspended in deference to taking care of the Chol She'ein Bo Sakana. So Amir L'Achim just becomes the preferred D'Rabbanan to violate, because then the Jew is not actually doing anything. So it's like a lesser of a D'Rabbanan. All right, so the 4th case is what we refer to as Amira Amira. This is very useful, yet very limited. So Amira Amira literally means to say to say. Okay, so whereas Amira La'akum is an Isser D'Rabbanan, to tell a non-Jew to do a malacha, so if you tell a non-Jew to tell a non-Jew to do a malacha, that then becomes, instead of being a classical double D'Rabbanan, this becomes a double Amira. So I have told non-Jew A not to do the malacha, that I'm not allowed to do. But I've told non-Jew A to tell non-Jew B to do the malacha. So no longer is non-Jew B my quote-unquote agent or acting on my request. He's acting on the middleman's request, who's then acting on my request. So this really is a workaround. This would be a loophole. It is only usable in a case of hefsed meruba, great loss. Now, great loss is still defined like it was before, which means it will be relative to the circumstances. So what may be a great loss for one person is certainly not a great loss for another person. What may be a great loss in one scenario may not be a great loss in another scenario, but that defines great loss. So it comes out like this. If you need to avoid a great loss, you could either ask a non-Jew directly to do an Isser D'Rabbanan, or you could ask a non-Jew to ask a non-Jew to do an Isser D'Oraisa, which effectively really is the same thing because you're one step removed. And the idea here is logical in the entire concept of Amir Lakum and the entire concept of what the rabbis are trying to do. The concern is when there's a great loss at stake, that is the single greatest Yetzer Hara for someone who normally wants to keep Shabbos to not keep Shabbos, right? If there's a tremendous financial loss, tremendous being relative, but if it's what would be considered a great financial loss, so that is going to be the simplest, biggest nisayon for a person who otherwise would want to be Shomer Shabbos. So for the rabbis to be strict in that case would simply undermine their ultimate goal, which is preservation of Shabbos. So this is exactly the scenario where the rabbis are going to be most lenient with using a non-Jew, because if the whole purpose of not using a non-Jew is to enhance Shmira Shabbos in a normal case, so clearly where the choice is using the non-Jew or putting a Jew in the nisayon of violating Shabbos to prevent a great loss, the rabbi saw it, well, this was logical. Here is where we want to use the non-Jew, so the Jew doesn't have to do the malacha. So it had it been an Isser D'Rabbanan standing in the way of the great loss, so then you could have asked the non-Jew directly. That's what we learned in the first group of things. And now in the case of a Isser D'Oraisa, which is required to avoid a great loss, so you cannot ask the guy directly, because that would still be a violation, but you could ask the guy to ask the guy. Yeah.
So you could say, can you tell your wife to?
Yes. I'll give a couple examples in a minute, and then you ask, because this does come up. I mean, I can make up cases that are more fantastic, but I'll give you cases that will actually come up. There is one condition to this, which is that the second guy can't know that he's doing it on behalf of a Jew. So you can ask guy one, who can then ask guy two, but guy two can't know that he's working for a Jew. If guy two knows he's working for a Jew, so then it's irrelevant that it went through another person. It's still connected Jew to non-Jew. All right, so I would say the first case okay, let's work it this way. The most common example where this will be relevant would be in next day shipping. So, and this is probably the first time I came across this halacha in practice, but it will greatly date the the shaila based on what it was. My sister was out of town. She wanted to change. She was somewhere else for Shabbos. She wanted to change a flight itinerary. She actually needed a ticket, which is an amazing concept. So we had to get the actual physical ticket to her quicker than, I don't remember all the details, whatever it was. But so we had to, next day she needed it by Sunday, and it was Friday. So basically they weren't going to deliver it on Sunday, so it had to be delivered on Shabbos. So anytime you send a package, I don't say anytime, almost always, what's going to happen is you're going to meet someone at a counter that you're going to give the package to. The chances that that person is delivering your package or doing any malacha for you on Shabbos is slim to none. What is happening in almost every scenario is they are checking it in on Friday, and it's going to another person in a room, to another person, to another person, to another person. So every case, unless you're dealing with a private courier service where you're handing it to the person. So every time you ship something next day on Friday to be delivered on Shabbos is going to be an Amira situation, because you're telling the person at the desk, I need this shipped on Shabbos. So basically you're telling them to do a malacha for you on Shabbos, but they're not the one doing the malacha. They will then in turn tell somebody else, even if it's not a verbal communication, simply by passing the package along, they're telling someone else. Now that person, unless it says like, I don't know, a bunch of Happy Hanukkah Magen Davids on the wrapping paper or whatever, should not know that it is being sent by a Jew. I don't know if anyone would be mocked that if you have a very Jewish sounding name that you couldn't put it in the return address. I don't think that's what the halacha meant in this case, as opposed to a different case, which I think it did refer to. The point being that if one would need to get something next day, Lamashal, if I don't think it works this way technically, but just to pretend, if you had, let's say, a tax deadline or a bill deadline, Hashem did us all a favor, at least in the second half of the 20th century and on, by making Saturday an off day for the Goyim. So there really isn't anything that needs to happen on a Shabbos. But hypothetically speaking, if you had a bill to pay, and if you didn't pay it, there would be a penalty, and the penalty would be for each person. All those would be examples of where Amira would automatically come in the entire shipping industry to get something delivered next day. Another case, and this is not the fantastic case that probably would never actually happen, but I like because it's a good example. The next case that might actually happen, although unlikely, but it could happen, if a person had car trouble. It's a nice case because it illustrates multiple parts of the point. If someone had car trouble and they needed their car Motzi Shabbos, and the car trouble developed on Friday, so what they would need someone to give the car to a mechanic to work on Shabbos. Okay, so you would not be able to go to the mechanic without jumping into the next subject matter. You would not be able to go to the mechanic an hour before Shabbos to pick it up an hour after Shabbos if it's a 5-hour job. So let's just leave it at that. And that's a simple case. We'll talk about more in detail about that later, but you wouldn't be able to do that. So now, what if I have a non-Jewish friend who I can say very simply, it's going to be my Sabbath soon. I'm in a rush. Can you just do me a favor? Take the keys, drive it to the mechanic, drop it off by the mechanic, and I'll pick it up after Shabbos, and that's done. That's all you have to do for me. So in that case, that would be another Amir Amira. I mean, you tell the non-Jew to tell the mechanic, who we assume is not Jewish, to do the work. That would be an Amir Amira. Now, if I need the car and there's enough money for my particular situation, whatever the case is, that I need that car, Motzi Shabbos, whatever, whatever it is, and that would qualify as a hefsed meruba, so that would work. Now, here is where I like the case. If the person puts in the information to the computer and it spits up your name as the owner of the car, and he knows you because it's a small town, and I know when I drop something off by Tim, on Ireland, it's like he'll tell me, like, I get all the good gossip of every Jews who has car issues in the last 30 months. So he knows like exactly who, at least who's from, because he knows the community. So it would be a problem because he would then he would actually be able to match names. That wouldn't work. If you're Pep Boys, which is more of a Chicago corporation, but some of these places where you're not meeting a person who owns the shop. These are workers, 9 to 5. They don't have a clue who's who, and they pay attention to the name. They don't pay attention. They wouldn't. Then it would be, that would be. So it's a good case because you get the full idea in a relatively practical thing. Although, this takes Amir Lakum to the next level of. Usually they have to come into your house and they don't know, what's going to be, like here you have to trust them with your car keys and everything. But then again, your car is broken. So there's only so much they're going to go with it. No, but you have the non-Jew take the car to the mechanic, assuming the mechanic doesn't connect it, that it's a Jew's car, then it would be mutter, again, with the hefsed meruba. The other case, and then if you can think of a more practical case in your own lives, but we teach this case just because it's far out, but again, it works nicely. You're in a new place, you're visiting someone, and you park, and this could definitely happen in Chicago, where there's certain parts of the year you're not allowed to park, regardless if there's snow, not snow. It's like there's snow routes, whether there's snow or not. So you don't know these rules. You come, you drop off the car Friday afternoon, whatever, and then all of a sudden your host tells you, where did you park? Around the corner. Oh, gosh, you're gonna get towed. And this could, between the towing fee, the ticket, the inconvenience, this could easily become a hefsed meruba, again, depending on your situation. So what you could theoretically do would be ask a non-Jew to ask another non-Jew to move your car. And that would be the idea of, to ask the one non-Jew would be a Amir Lakum. Driving a car is going to be an Isser Doraisa. If it's an electric car, it may be an Isser Dorabanan, but if it's not, it will certainly be an Isser Doraisa to drive the car. But if you can ask one non-Jew to ask another non-Jew, and the assumption being is that the other non-Jew doesn't know, you from anything, because you don't even belong here. You're a guest. So that, again, that like that case, for other reasons, just because you can, yeah.
So I'm imagining Tim or Kim Gray.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask them to ask, and they're going to ask Abby Gray, who's like 18, to move my car. So they're for sure going to say, the Lindows can't do it because they're sad.
So you can't, right? You have to avoid that.
So could I say to Tim, I need you to ask somebody else.
Don't tell them.
But don't tell them why. Don't tell them it's me.
Right, yes.
And Abby knows where I live, so it was my house, and Abby, or even the Torah Center, like.
Right, yes, you have to, that would be part of the chachma in this. And again, it's much, much easier in the example of the what do you call it? The shipping, because it's not an issue. But the truth is, the shipping example just becomes easy. I would imagine that in many services it's like that. Like, my guess would be, if you go to Zyker's, that might be Jewish altogether, so maybe more complicated. But if you go to, I don't know, are they actually still Jewish, or you'd have to do some
The
research.
Zeikers are involved in the business, and I think that the Zeikers.
They stay
are
Jewish.
Jewish.
Okay. In any case, the point is that the lady behind the counter, is she really the one who is pressing probably not. So
No, they send it out.
altogether.
Yeah.
All right. So it's out there. It's a useful heter. It's not very common. It's not going to be as common, certainly not as Chodesh Sakana. That would probably be the most common case of involving a non-Jew directly would be when someone is sick. But this is a useful tool to avoid great loss, but it does have its limitations, both in practicality, that again, you need to be able to have two non-Jews who can work with, and the second one can't know you. But in that professional arena, which if you need something right away after Shabbos, is going to be generally hard to get around, this would be a good get around. Yeah.
So the dry cleaning doesn't work that, like you can't do the dry cleaning an hour before Shabbos.
Right, so what it would be, I don't know how long it takes to dry clean. Let's say it takes 2 hours just to make the case relevant. So if you drop it off a half hour before Shabbos and you demand to have it be able to be picked up a half hour after Shabbos, so as we will learn in the next thing, that becomes problematic. So then theoretically, if there was a hefsed meruba in getting the dry cleaning done, so then you'd be able to do this. I'm assuming that the person running the press does not know who's the owner of the clothes. So
Right, but just, I get home from work.
you understand, I'm going to the dry cleaner.
So I've got a pile of stuff,
So
I want to take it to the dry clean. I've got a few minutes before Shabbos. Shabbos starts at 5 o'clock. When they close.
Right, so that we'll discuss in the next thing.
Oh,
But
okay.
for this purpose you can't get it done not on Shabbos.
Okay.
So that it's going to be a problem. It's almost never going to actually be that way. Lechatchila, there might be other things to take into consideration, but practically speaking, it's rarely going to be that way. But if it is, then in all those crazy things working together, then this becomes a viable leniency. Okay, that's Amira le'Amira. The fifth leniency, which is useful and again infrequently, but when needed is very helpful, is when there is a mitzvah or a michshol, that would be the positive or the avoidance of the negative to the rabbin, to the public at large. So anytime the public's mitzvah observance or aveira avoidance can be fixed by a malacha, so then you would be allowed to ask a non-Jew directly to do an Isser D'Oraisa. So the common example given for this is if the lights are off in shul because someone knocked out the lights, and the tzibor would not be able to daven, so then you could ask a non-Jew directly, and the truth is that the whole hinting thing is out anyways because it's a prohibited benefit anyway. So
What thing is that?
the meaning, I don't even know what to say.
It's
The hinting, right? It's not a matter of, I said you can ask directly, but the truth is that that's not really relevant because since you're turning on a light, it's going to be usher. The point is that we waive the whole Isser, and once we waive it, you can ask them directly. There's no middle ground. But you can ask the non-Jew to turn the light on because without the light, the people can't daven. That would be, but it's got to be the rabbin. So if it was the room that you daven in your house, then you're back to only being able to ask a Isser D'Rabbanan. So if you want to compare this to what we had before, so for a mitzvah d'yachid, an individual's mitzvah, we said you could ask a non-Jew directly to do an Isser D'Rabbanan. You would not be able to ask a non-Jew to do an Isser D'Oraisa. When it comes to the public, then you can ask them directly even to do a Isser D'Oraisa, the idea being the public need is more important than the private need, and therefore we are more lenient. Turning on light in shul is definitely the most common example of this. We had a Shiloh once where we were strict, where there was an issue with the coffee machine or the hot water machine at HOC, and asked a couple people. I guess Ray Bowman wasn't there at the time, but at least I wanted to, say that the ability to have tea for the tzibor is not the same thing as light for that. So yes, it affects the rabbim. Yes, it may enhance their experience, but I don't know if that's what it means. Mitzvah de rabbim, it means a mitzvah de rabbim. So, the light going on, I suppose if you'd have a communal sukkah where a lot of people were relying on that sukkah, and there's something messed up with the sukkah, and to ask a non-Jew directly to build something, to make a repair on Yaksha, I guess that would also be a case. The common example that we use for mikshol l'rabim, which would be to remove a stumbling block, would be the Erev that goes down on Shabbos. So if an Erev goes down on Shabbos, so that's a disaster, especially if it goes down in the middle where people are not yet aware of what's going on. So notwithstanding all the halachas of whether or not you do tell people, you don't tell people, that's all something else. There's no question that if repairs can be made on Shabbos, even if those repairs require an Isser D'Oraisa, you would be able to ask a repairman, however that would work, to make those repairs, because that would be to avoid a Mikshol L'Rabim, because otherwise you'll have people inevitably carrying, and even if they don't know, and it might be technically mutter for them, since before Shabbos, the Erev was up. So there's a chazaka, the Erev is up. And if they don't know differently, it could be that they're allowed to carry, but the facts are they're not. They're allowed to because they don't know. So to remove that, you'd be able to ask the non-Jew to make the necessary repairs. This is usually not necessary because there are permissible ways to do it. But if there would be let's say an ice slick on the pathway to Shul or something like that. So generally speaking, salting a ice spot is not actually usser. So it's usually not an issue. If there's an Erev, if there wouldn't be an Erev, it would probably be an Isser D'Rabbanan to throw it out, and you certainly would be able to ask the non-Jew to do it, even if it was possibly your own private house and the like. But discuss if you'd have a situation where you would need to shovel, or you would need to do something without an Erev, that it could theoretically, let's say it was a Rishus Harabim, or someone held it was a Rishus Harabim, and there would be a Doraisa element, if it meant being able to safely get to Shul. So then again, you could ask a non-Jew to do it. That would be mitzvah Harabim. Accessing Shul coupled with the safety element certainly would make that also a case where it would be allowed. So those would be other cases of mitzvah Harabim, mikshel Harabim. Those also are okay, even to ask directly a Isser D'Oraisa. Okay, and the last one is the shortest and the least applicable, but it's for a bris milah. There's a special leniency in bris milah, even though it's a mitzvah de yachid. It's special because it's usher and it's mutter on Shabbos. So what I mean is the act of cutting the baby and drawing blood really should be a Shabbos prohibition. In fact, it would be a Shabbos prohibition if the baby was not on its 8th day, if the baby was not born naturally, if a C-section doesn't have a bris on the 8th day. But if a baby's 8th day is Shabbos, so the bris is doche Shabbos. Now, a Jew cannot violate Shabbos for peripherals of the bris. So in the terrible scenario that the mohel would have forgotten the knife where the baby was, and therefore you needed to move the baby to the knife or the knife to the baby, a Jew could not do that, because although the bris itself is doche Shabbos, the peripherals of the bris are not doche Shabbos. Certainly, although this would not happen in the modern era, but they talk about this in the poskim, if the knife was ruined, it was nicked or whatever, to fix the knife, that a Jew could not do on Shabbos, but that you could have a non-Jew do that. And that would also incorporate medicine. The application of the medicine obviously is allowed, but if you didn't have the medicine, so you had to go purchase the medicine, so that a Jew could not do on Shabbos, even if that meant, well, we can't do the bris, we don't have the necessary gauze or whatever needs to be bought. So those peripheral things are all allowed through a non-Jew. But the general idea that since the bris itself is made mutter for a Jew, so even though halacha is machmer, it's actually machlokas back to the Mishnah, but we hold like the opinion that says we only do the bris, we don't do any of the preparation, that's docha Shabbos, we only do the bris, everything else has to be done before Shabbos, which makes for interesting questions because really the knife becomes muksa right after the mole's done, he's got to put it down where he wants it to stay for the, there's a bunch of different things that go on. We actually had 2 Shabbos brises, so we gotta, yeah. So 2 Shabbos brises. So we got the rundown on it's the mole have it down to a science. They drop the thing off before and where it needs to be, and everything's taken care of. They know what they're doing. But the one thing that I know, other than Kiddush wine, but that becomes a tricky thing because right, the mole is essentially making it's making a geffen, and there's a kiddush at that time also. So that's the actual kiddush that becomes an issue, and the bigger issue is just what to do with the knife. Again, he can't put it down until it's put away. So but in any case,
wherever he puts it down,
that's where it is, right? So when it comes out is that all those other things, if you didn't do it, you could have a non-Jew do. The poskim do note the one thing you can, I think one of you mentioned this before, the one thing you can't do is say, we'd rather have the bris in shul, we'd rather have the bris at a hall because then we could have the Suda, and so therefore we'll set everything up there. The baby won't be there. That will be a big problem for the bris. So a Jew won't be able to carry the baby. We'll get a guy to carry the baby to the bris. So that you cannot do because we would simply tell you that it's very nice to have a hall and it's very nice to have a big Suda. So this is an emergency, escape hatch. It is not a lichatchila. So you don't plan a bris where the baby is not where the baby needs to be, and then say, well, I need to move the baby, so a guy can move the baby. No, that bris has to take place in the house. Stuff has to be dropped off. There'd be no incentive to have it someone else to have the guy move. But the point is that this leniency, and the truth is that this is true in Amir al-Akam in general. Any of these cases, and I actually give you a practical case that actually happened. Any of these cases where any of these 6 or really the other, they all are assumed that you did not set it up for that. Meaning the idea is we're not doing malach on Shabbos, and Chazal are protecting Shabbos. So in cases of great need, stress, public needs, bris has its own, special leniency. So we'll get you out of a pinch by using a non-Jew. But you can never arrange it where you rely on the non-Jew, which it becomes an interesting, we'll get to this later, but it becomes an interesting discussion when you have an event in a hotel that requires a non-Jew to play with the doors. Even if we'll discuss why that might be allowed, it becomes tricky as to, but should we set it up that way? Like maybe we should do something different. But then we'll get to when we get more into what malacha is being done and why it's okay and how to do it better. But in the case of the bris, that would be a simple case where you can't set it up to be the bris is taking place in shul because that's where you want the bris to be, because then the Suda can be more people and this and that. And the baby can't live in shul the whole Shabbos, but so what? We'll get a guy to move it because a guy could move a baby to a bris. Well, that's true if there's some emergency, but you can't schedule it that way because that would not be. So
if there's a native, then there's no.
Yeah, that's not an issue.
So you're saying we can ask directly? Is this something?
Yes, directly for the bris. Yeah, something that would be needed for the bris. The case that we had was in Skokie Yeshiva. We were making. I think we were. I don't think it was for one of the bris. I think it was for a bar mitzvah. So a cousin of mine wanted to come, They wanted to stay at the Holiday Inn, which is across the street, but there is no Eruv to the two places. And there was, I mean, we had some immediate family in the building itself, but so they had a small child and they wanted to come. So they asked, can they come? And then on Shabbos, there'll be no food, right? Because they're not bringing food. And then there'll be a situation where the kid will be in a chola sheimbo sakana situation. You'll have to carry the kid, so they'll get a guy to roll the kid across the street to, which is a carmel. It's not even, it's not a deraisa. So we were, I asked someone for him, but I was able, would have told him the same thing. You just can't do that. Now, it's true. If your car breaks down and you're stuck and this and that, yes, it's a useful thing to know. You can't come somewhere set up before Shabbos and say, oh my gosh, I'm stuck, I need a guy. It's just, that's what we're avoiding. So it's spoken out in the poskim, specifically in this bris milah case, because I guess it was a thing to schedule the bris somewhere outside the house and use the heter moving the baby to there, and they were you can't do that. We had, one baby, we're still in the yeshiva, so it didn't matter. But the second kid, we had everything was in the house, which was across the street, and then we went back for the Suda. It wasn't such a big deal because it was close, but that's just how it goes.
There was an area between where you lived in? No. So the bris was in the house.
The bris, we went from shul to the bris, back to the Suda, and someone stayed with the baby. Yeah, I mean, it's a fun story that I can't tell as to why a was never made between us and the yeshiva, but
you can't even tell if the recorder's off.
No, because inevitably, if I told the story, you might be able to figure out who the impediments to it were. Since I'm going to be part of the people who wanted it, I'm not going to be happy with the impediment people. So, okay. Now, new topic. We'll start it now and we will continue it hopefully next week. This is a global look at an employee-employer relationship as it relates to a non-Jew doing work on behalf of a Jew on Shabbos. So to put it in a context, up until now, we've been discussing a zillion scenarios and halachas where you are a homeowner, you are a citizen, you are a person, you are a guest, whatever you are, and you have a situation that requires the help of a non-Jew. Okay, that's not, now we're talking about where you are the employer and the non-Jew is the employee. So halacha defines two types of employee-employer relationships, and they are extremely different as it relates to Amir La'akum. So in Hebrew, the two terms are a kablan, kuf beis lamed nun, from the word kabel, to receive. He is a what we would call a task-oriented worker. He is hired to do a job. And then you have a sechir yom, which sounds like what it is. Sechir from hire, yom, day. He's a daily worker, meaning he works by day. Now, you could oversimplify this by saying it's the difference between a person who's paid by a job and paid by the hour. But it's not accurate. It's a good oversimplification, but it's not accurate because you'll get confused in the following case. If I hire a mechanic to work on my car, so when the mechanic gives me a bill and I ask him, why did it cost $275 for labor? He'll tell me because on the clock, it was 3 hours of work and it was 80 some dollars, whatever the math is. And therefore you could mistakenly think he is paid by the hour because he is paid by the hour, but he is not a schir yom. You don't pay him by the hour. He charges by the hour to do a job that is not hourly. So as an oversimplification, you can say it's a task-oriented job and an hourly job, but it's not 100% accurate. A more accurate definition would be, someone who is paid to complete a task versus someone who is paid to do multiple or any tasks for you over a period of time. So in the simple example of this, we use the secretary is usually the simplest example of a shlir yom, right? Secretary is hired, let's just use the standard 9 to 5. So what is the secretary's job? Well, the secretary's job is to do anything within the realm of her job description for the boss between the hours of 9 and 5. And the idea would be that at 8:45, the boss can't ask her to make him coffee or fill out the forms or whatever. And at 5:05, he can't, but at 4:45, he can. So whatever takes place, whatever needs to be done within the realm of her job, from 9 to 5, she's on call. After that, she's not on call. That would be a shlir yom. She works for the employer for that period of time. What does she do? Whatever she is tasked to doing. If she finishes the first task, then she does the next task. So she's paid by the hour, but not just being paid by the hour. She works for a period of time, and whatever she needs to do during that time, she does. In contrast, your mechanic, your seamstress, your fix-it man, anything like that, where the job is to make the car run. The job is to produce a dress. The job is to, fix the electricity, whatever it is. So it's not about how long it takes. You may bill me based on how long it takes, but you're not employed for this hour to that hour. You're employed to get the job done. It's up to you to decide when to do it. And that becomes the critical distinguishing thing. A shlir yom, an hourly worker, is considered to be working for you during those hours. The task-oriented person is working for himself during those hours as opposed to any other hour. The job is being done for you, but the time that he's working is being done for himself. And that makes all the difference. Because when the shlir yom, you can't ignore the fact that those hours are your hours. It doesn't go well in the modern, terminology, but you own the person. You don't own them, but you own them for that period of time, right? They're yours. I think that's even an expression, right? You're mine for that amount of time. The mechanic is never yours. You just need to get the car fixed. He'll do it when he's good and ready to do it because he's not an hourly worker. He works for himself to do jobs for you. Okay, so these are totally different. In general, the Kabbalan is going to be way, way more lenient. The shlir yom is going to be way, way more strict for the simple reason that the shlir yom, when they do work on Shabbos or Yom Tov, they're doing work on Shabbos or Yom Tov for you. Whereas the Kabbalan, if he's doing work on Shabbos or Yom Tov, that's his time to do your job. Yeah.
Which is more complicated? Shlir yom is more complicated.
Shlir yom is much more complicated to allow on Shabbos. Because
and that was seamstress, mechanic.
No, that's Kabbalah.
Okay.
Shlir yom is you own their time. So if they're working on Shabbos, it really means you're having them work for you on Shabbos.
Is the secretary also an example of secretary?
Secretary is shlir yom.
Shlir yom. The mechanic and seamstress are
Right. The other example that we'll use, but it's the most complicated example because they double over, and that's why it's really a separate thing, would be a housekeeper. Because a housekeeper generally is hired between this hour and that hour, and whatever you need her to do in that time, she does. But depending on what the relationship is and how often she comes, it's not always like that. So a housekeeper is especially one that doesn't come only on Shabbos, but will come on Shabbos and at least one other time during the week. It could have a dual relationship depending on what you're asking them to do. We'll deal with housekeepers as a separate entity. But right now we leave off with, you have your Kabbalans, your task oriented, your computer fix-it guy, your seamstress, your mechanic, your, this, your gardener would be that way also. Again, the gardener will literally come whenever he feels good and ready to come. You cannot lock him down into a time, but and I don't know if they probably don't even charge by the hour. They really just charge by the job. But so that's one thing. And then again, your secretary, your housekeeper, your, I suppose other positions also would be paid, your 9 to 5 worker, your salesman, any of these things are being paid by those hours. So that becomes much more complicated. Mir Hashem, next time we will start with the rules of the Kabbalah, and it's probably the most Lemaisa thing, because this is going to have to do with your ordering before Shabbos, you're giving something in before Shabbos. And there are parameters and rules to that, but it is far more lenient than using a Skir Yom. That becomes really tricky. Okay.
I'm just confused, like, when would you have, like, unless you're running a
Yes,
company.
but lots of people run companies, and
Okay.
on Yontif, not on Shabbos so much, but there are issues on Shabbos, but on Yontif, during the week, it certainly becomes an issue.